Have you ever been wanting to set up an engine on a cart or some sort of a wagon for the garden or something like that, and you need an axle and a turntable and not really sure how to go about getting one or how to make one? Well, today I thought I'd show you how I make these turntables, and if you've seen my other video, you've seen how I go about making these wheels, so if you haven't seen that, check that out as well. But let's take a closer look at these axles and turntables, and then we'll get into showing you the steel that I use. Okay, so let's come down a little bit closer and take a look at what I've got set up here. So I've just had some steel that I've had lying around, and I've cut these plates here, 2 turntables, a spacer here, a plate to then bolt up onto the timber, and also a plate across here to actually extend all the way across between both timber runners. So let's go around and have a look at the back axle setup. These are the wheels that I make for my wagons, and as I said, check out my other video and you'll see how to make those. Here we are at the back. Let's take a closer look here, looking through to the front. So there's 4 pieces. We've got a plate to bolt down onto the axle. So that's the second, third piece, and the plate to bolt onto our bearer. And if we go around this way, they actually come up pretty well. Anyway, let's move inside now and I'll show you the various pieces and how I go about making them. Okay, here we are. We've got the turntable assembly, got the various parts cut and drilled and polished and ground ready to be welded. So let's have a little bit of a look of it in place so you can see what each particular part does. It's fairly straightforward. This plate here bolts across the top of the turntable, and the 2 bearers for the engine go across along there. Okay, so here we've got, this is the U-bolt. It's a 50mm or 2-inch U-bolt, 10mm in diameter, and obviously this goes in here and holds the axle in place. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at the measurements. So I'm using 130mm turntable. This piece here that has the U-bolt and bolts to the axle, there's the various measurements for that. And here's the little chock that goes across here, and there's the measurements there. This little is really just a spacer, so you can see the measurements there, and that welds on top of there, so then that plate can go on here to create clearance for the bolt to go through. Okay, so here we've got the rear axle assembly. So we've got the plate that the engine bearer goes on. Here are the measurements for that. Again, the plate that has the U-bolt go through that bolts to the axle. And these 2 parts here, there are the measurements. I'll show you those in a second, where each of those parts go. It is raining at the moment too, so there might be a little bit of noise on the roof as we're videoing. So that's just sort of sitting there at the moment to give you a bit of an example where each part goes. Here are the brackets that slide onto the axles, and the purpose of these is to stop the wheels sliding along the axle. So obviously I'll weld these in, and on the front here we've got the pins that will hold the shaft for the steering on the axle. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So we might make a start now of welding it all together. Okay, we've got our turntable in place. I've taken one of these half moon spacers and I've clamped that on. We'll get the next one on and clamped in, and then we'll get this welded on. So we'll just check with a couple of measurements as well, just to make sure that it's all sitting in the right place, and then we'll just get it tacked on. So I know the spacing between these two plates, or between these two spaces, is 7.5 centimeters. Okay, so we've got it all welded on now. We might just run the flat grinder over it and just tidy it up just a little bit. Okay, so we've got the top part of the turntable cleaned up. So now we're going to attach it to the two plates, or the plate that the two bearers come across here to hold the engine. So now the job is to weld this, or centre this, and then get that welded into place, and that will have our top of the turntable ready to go. Okay, it looks as if we now have that in place and looks to be centered. So we'll go ahead and clamp that down. And then we'll get it welded on. Look, I think that's come up all right. Got some nice welds on there. Might still polish that up a little bit more, but we might now move on to the next stage. Okay, so our next two parts, this extension and the plate that has the U-bolt in it that holds the axle. So I've drawn a line 3 centimeters from here. So we're now going to weld that onto there. And I'm not sure whether you can see, then obviously that then gets welded onto there. But we'll go ahead now and clamp this part and get that welded, and then we'll move on. Okay, so we've got our two axle brackets welded together. Okay, so let's just check to see whether we've got these in place, ready for welding. So it's about 18 millimeters from each side. Now the steel I'm making this turntable out of is 12 millimeters, so this is one of our parts for the rear axle. So just put that in on either side of the nut, just to make sure that we've got the same distance. So we'll get that welded on. Okay, so here's the turntable assembly, all welded together. It's come up pretty well. Still needs a little bit of grinding just to tidy it off. Now I've put a hole in the front here because when you're letting engines and things down off a trailer or loading them up, it's handy to get the steering in a locked position so that it doesn't swing around and jackknife as you're letting them down. But anyway, so that's the turntable. Okay, so now we're up to making the brackets for the rear axle of this trolley. So these parts get assembled in this order. Like that. And then the plate that has the timber bearer on it then goes on there. Okay, so we've got those three pieces welded together. Obviously got to clean them up a little bit. I might put a weld across the back just here now, and then we'll get this top plate which carries the timber. We'll get that welded on as well. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit hot for me to hold. But anyway, that's the bracket for the rear axle. Obviously there's two of them. That one's going to have to be cleaned up a little bit, but we're well on the way. So I'll just finish tidying up a few welds, do a little bit of surface grinding, and then I'll make the second one. Okay, so here's one of the two rear brackets. They've come up pretty nice. And so now we've got the front and the rear done. Now it's just a chance to weld up these little brackets that stop the wheels sliding across the axle. Okay, it's taken a little bit of time. We've got everything now cut out, welded, cleaned up. The turntables come out quite nice. The rear engine blocks, they've come out nice. And the front brackets to stop the wheels moving over, but also to connect to the steering, all come out nice. So we'll get this now assembled onto the timber, and we'll get an engine sitting up on top. Okay, so we've got it in position, and we'll now drill the holes. Okay, so we've got it bolted on. We're going to use 800mm axles, and part of trying to keep it as narrow as possible, but also trying to have it steer and turn as easy as possible. And to have two shorter axles means the turning circle will be much smaller. But anyway, we'll start getting this assembled. Here's our brackets that we were talking about before that connect to the steering rod, but also stop the wheel from sliding over. So we'll just slide these parts on. Okay, so we've got our 2 brackets for the rear axle. Now we've got to make sure we're up the front, we're 40 centimetres wide. That's pretty good. So it's 40 centimetres wide here.
Slide the wheels on.
Okay, there's the engine transport all bolted together, it's come up well. Time to tip it over and sit the engine down on top. Let's just see how much steering we've got. That should be plenty of steering. Okay, here's the engine transport. So we're just about ready to lower this John Deere engine down on top. Okay, the engine cart's complete now. We've got the engine on top. The cart itself has come up really nice. The engine is, I think it's a 2010, petrol 2010. The engine's been sitting in the shed for, 20 years I suppose, and watch on, because in the next few weeks hopefully I'll get this engine running. But in the meantime, let's just walk around and have a look at a close-up look at how the engine cart's been finished. So these are the wheels I made, and you can see how to make those wheels in another video that I put up on YouTube there a couple of months ago. So check that out if you want to know how to make wheels. Come up very nicely. Be interesting to see this old petrol John Deere engine running again. Yeah, it's not the original radiator, and I've got to work out a position to put the gauges back up. But anyway, the engine cart's come up really nice. So there we go, all finished now. Hope you liked the video. Hope there's something in there that might be helpful to you if you're wanting to make an engine cart. And look, if you're interested in other John Deeres or other stationary engines, check out Waterloo Creek. You might find that there's some other tractors or engines there that might interest you. Anyway, thanks for watching.